Hi and welcome to In Conversation. My name's Birgit Whelan and it's lovely to be with you for the program today, filling in for Gordon. And we have a very special program planned for you today discussing the topic of children in need. Young people whose lives have been affected by poverty, hunger, neglect and abandonment, and the work of a UK-based charity called Global Care to respond with aid and support to these children in need. So it's my pleasure to welcome to the program today the Chief Executive for Global Care, John White. John, welcome to the program today.
Thank you very much, Margaret. It's lovely to be with you.
Wonderful. Well, it would be great, John, to start off hearing a little bit about you. So hearing about your background growing up as the child of missionaries in Lebanon and also your own journey to faith. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself to start with.
I was born in Beirut, Lebanon, actually, and spent all my early years there growing up. Parents were missionary teachers there in a school, evangelical school there. And I think over the years I was brought up in a Christian home, and we used to go to summer camps, as you always do, I think a lot of people do. And at one of these summer camps was a missionary who was working with children, and one of his great gifts was to go around to young people. So I was about 11 at the time. Come up to you and say, you know, are you a Christian, you see? And I said, well, yes, I think so. That was the answer. And he goes, no, that's not good enough. You know, have you really made that decision yourself? Are you sure? And it was on that day, on that evening, that I decided there and then that I would decide to follow Jesus. And I always look back on that day as being really key, because up till that time I thought I, you know, kind of was. Do you know what I mean? But it was on that day that I decided. Stayed in Lebanon for most of my secondary school. We came back to the UK sometimes for visits, but most of my time was there. And then I returned to the UK to university at Bristol. So when I finished my education in Lebanon.
It's so interesting, John, hearing about how you came to this point of salvation. It's always really interesting to hear God's timing with these things and how unique his approach is with each of us. So you hearing this evangelist and him being very passionate and very direct, and it was like the catalyst for you making that decision. So it's really great to hear your own story. And I'm just interested, John, when you became a Christian and you returned to the UK to go to university, as you grew in your faith, did you have a sense of vocation, of calling, in a similar way to your parents to become a missionary?
I always felt I wanted to be able to use my life actually in a very clear way to share Jesus with other people, to make a difference to other people's lives, to have the opportunity to share what God had done in my life and the difference he'd made in my life, and what he'd brought, that hope and that joy, that future for me, really, and to be able to share that with other people. So that was always something on my heart, yes.
And eventually you did begin missionary work yourself. Would you like to talk about that for a moment? Yes,
I went to Bristol for a few years. I think it was 3 in those days. I went to university to get your first degree, and then went up to Warwick University to do a further degree. And then I started working there. I met my wife Hazel, and went and started working in Oxfordshire in a government research, actually in wind energy. So it was a bit strange. It was taking my engineering into wind power and generating electricity and pumping water. And it was during that time that Hazel and I felt that we really wanted to be able to have the opportunity to return, to go and do something very practical, to share our faith in a different culture and a different place. And we took the opportunity. There was a placement in Lebanon in a school there, and we took the opportunity to go and work there.
And it was over the course of your time in Lebanon that you were contacted by the founder of Global Care. Would you like to talk about how that early relationship formed?
Yeah, when I was in university in Warwick, I got to know Ron Newby, who was the founder and first CEO of Global Care, and he had a real passion for children, and he had founded this charity, Global Care, which was trying to work with children in a number of different countries. When he heard we were going to Lebanon, he came to us and said, look, could you set up something in Lebanon, a sponsorship program, identifying very needy children, vulnerable children, that could be helped through some sort of support for fees at school, or just to help with some of their social needs. And so my wife and I set up a global care sponsorship scheme in Lebanon.
And your relationship grew because eventually you came back to the UK and you were approached by Ron again at that point, and this is when you began to work with the charity on a more full-time basis.
Yes, we returned to Lebanon at the end of the 90s, and a few years after I returned, Ron came over and said, look, we need some extra help with some of the operations work, why don't you join us and help with that? And that's how I got formally involved here in the UK with Global Care.
So, John, let's talk about the work of Global Care then. It would be great, first of all, to hear about the history of how the charity was founded.
Ron originally worked for the Children's Society here in the UK and had a real passion for disadvantaged and vulnerable children. He was at an international conference in Nairobi, speaking there about some of the work he'd been doing here and some of the ideas and work that was going on. And someone from Uganda had come to the conference and said, you really need to come to Uganda and see what the needs are like. So he went up to the border with Kenya and Uganda, went across into Uganda and found just hundreds of children just living on the street with no one to care for them. So he came back to the UK and started wandering around telling people, look, we've got all these children, can you do anything about it? Went to see a number of different agencies. And they said, look, we're really committed, we're already over-committed to what we have to do. Yeah. And in the end, one of them turned around and said, look, if you're really so worried about these children, why don't you start your own charity, your own organisation to do something about these children? Wow. And so that's how he actually started with these. I think he started with originally about 10 of them, which he started working with, and then working with partners in Uganda, developed that work. So that's how it started in 1983. Okay,
and this was obviously post-Idi, the regime in Uganda at that time. Yeah, and this is back in the early 80s.
That's right, yes.
And so the charity has grown quite substantially since then. Can you tell us a little bit about the work overseas? And I mean, there are 40 countries that Global Care has an outreach into. So can you talk a little bit about that work?
We have 40 projects, about 19 different countries that we're working in.
Yeah.
And so we work all the way from over in Honduras and Colombia right over to Cambodia, the other way. So it's brought right across different continents. All of these projects are really very directed at vulnerable children. So we're looking at the children who are sort of slipping through the net, where there's very few options for them, not many ways that they can be looked after. There isn't a structure in place to look after them or care for them, and wanting to respond to the need of these children.
Yes.
And working with local Christian groups who want to do something about that. They often find Christians real heart for these children, want to share Jesus, want to share their lives with them, want to help them, but just don't have, for want of a little bit of extra support, some training, someone coming in behind to be able to make the difference. And that's been Global Care's real heart and passion.
And if you had to summarise some of the most pressing needs that you see for vulnerable children around the world, what would those be?
I mean, you start with the basics. They need enough to eat and they need clean water just to survive. They need a safe place to stay, just to live, to remain alive. And that's often a place where we would be starting with them.
Yeah.
They need to have an opportunity for a future. They need to have access to education. And those sorts of things is where we would be really sort of beginning with the basics of keeping them alive, food to drink, getting them to a safe place, and then really wanting to give them an opportunity for their future. And so that would be through education, all the while working through with them their opportunities through these Christian groups of being to understand something of the claims of Jesus and on their lives, and something of the hope that he has, that they can have in him.
It's interesting, John. I mean, it sounds like quite a holistic approach in that sense. So obviously communicating what the gospel to the children, but also taking care of welfare, of the practical needs, and also the educative aspect, and the vocational training, so that the possibility of more opportunities can open up for the children as they grow older. I wonder if we can speak specifically about some of the countries where you have projects and initiatives in place. And having looked at the website, it would be great to perhaps start talking about, well, I looked at India, Romania, Uganda. Perhaps we could talk about Uganda, given that that's where Ron was inspired to start the ministry. So can you talk specifically about that context, about the needs of the children in Uganda at this time?
The children we work with in Uganda often either have lost one parent or both parents.
Yeah.
In Uganda, there's a very good sort of community care for children in the sense that children will stay with a guardian who's a relative of the parents if both parents have passed away.
Right.
And we often come and find ourselves with the child who is being placed with these families. They're a poor family anyway. You've got this addition family.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. They've got another child on. So trying to work with these guardians to try and help them to ensure, and we would help to ensure that that child has access to education. And that we'd also make sure that child, there is some extra support for the family in terms of mosquito nets and lanterns and things like that. So the family themselves will gain something from looking after this child as well. It's not seen as if the child gets everything, but they, as the carers, trying to very much allow these, and a lot of these guardians are very, I mean, they're very poor themselves. To have an extra mouth to feed is very difficult for them. Yeah. We're trying to see how we can work alongside them. So that's one of our sponsorship schemes working very much. We're trying to work with children who are affected by AIDS, HIV. Very difficult for children to ensure that they get the regular medication they need. They need to get access to a decent level of nutrition to make it work properly, the medicines. So we're trying to work with the guardians of these children as well in probably a bit more careful, and we visit them a lot more often to ensure that it takes place. We're also trying to use, some children have lost so much education they're not going to be able to go through the standard school system. Yes. They won't be able to get their primary leaving certificates, which will enable them to read and write. But we will then have vocational opportunities for them, teaching them skills so that they can actually make money, and at the same time giving them basic literacy and numeracy. And all the ways, really trying to ensure that the children are okay now and they're safe and they're getting enough, but also that they have a future. I mean, one of the things that Ron was very keen on, and something that I think goes right the way through global care, is wherever possible allowing those children to have that look to the future. It's not just staying alive and keeping safe, but rather looking to the future.
Yeah, so it's creating that sense of hope and vision.
Yes.
It's wonderful. And also, on a practical note, there's also an issue with the water in Uganda, so that there's access to hygienic water, safe water. Can you talk about that as well? Yeah,
we're unusual. We're a children's charity, very focused on vulnerable, and yet in Uganda we're doing a lot about trying to find cheap ways of drilling boreholes for communities. And people say, well, are you a little bit off track on this? Well, yes, we are, but it's such a need. We found that we were working with some communities where children were walking 8 kilometres to get water and 8 kilometres back. There was no time for school.
Exactly.
They just wouldn't attend school. So we've been trying to we've developed a system of trying to drill quite cheap boreholes, working with another group who's been helping us. Yeah. Water for All have been helping us to look at that and develop that. And we're quite excited about what we're seeing, because as we drill that hole, it means that the children in the area end up going to school. Do you know what I mean?
So it's always with that objective in mind for the welfare of the child, and to facilitate their learning and their well-being. It's wonderful. Can we also look at the needs in another country, so Romania?